January 1945, Belgium. Snow everywhere. A frozen village that doesn't even know it's about to become history. One American soldier walks around a farmhouse corner and instantly realizes he should already be dead. 90 enemy soldiers are standing in front of him, not charging, not hiding, just staring. Half of them are armed, the rest are grabbing rifles from a pile on the ground. 4 American soldiers are kneeling in the snow, hands behind their heads, disarmed, helpless. These men were prisoners just minutes ago. Now they're free, and they're about to wipe out an entire American company from behind. A German officer steps forward, shoves a submachine gun straight into the American's stomach, screams an order in German. The American doesn't understand a single word. The officer screams louder, face red, veins popping. 90 rifles, 1 gun in his gut, 0 chances to survive. This is the moment where every soldier in history surrenders, but instead, the American starts laughing. Not nervous laughter, not fake bravado, real laughter, so loud that some of the German soldiers look at each other in confusion. The officer screams again. The American laughs harder. What happens next lasts less than 1 minute. When it's over, 21 enemy soldiers are dead. The rest are surrendering, and the man who laughed will be awarded the Medal of Honor for one of the most insane acts of World War II. Not because he was bigger, not because he had backup, not because he had a plan, but because in the face of certain death, he refused to break. Leonard Funk didn't look like the kind of man history remembers. He wasn't tall, he wasn't loud, he didn't have that movie star war hero energy. He was 5'5" on a good day, about 140 pounds, the kind of guy people underestimate without even realizing it. Leonard Alfred Funk Jr. was born in 1916 in Braddock Township, Pennsylvania, a steel town that smelled like smoke, sweat, and hard work. Mills along the Monongahela River ran day and night, and everyone learned early that nothing came easy. You worked or you didn't eat. Simple as that. Funk grew fast, not because he wanted to, because he had to. By the time he finished high school in 1934, the Great Depression was chewing through America like a slow disease. Jobs were rare. College was a fantasy. Funk was already helping raise his younger brother, already carrying responsibilities most kids never touched. He wasn't dreaming about glory. He was thinking about survival. When war exploded across Europe and Asia, Funk watched from a distance like everyone else. Poland, France, Britain standing alone. It felt far away until it didn't. June 1941. Congress expanded the draft. Funk's number came up. At the induction center in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania, the Army doctor looked him over. Short, lean, quiet. Probably figured he'd end up behind a desk somewhere, pushing papers until the war ended. They were wrong. When asked what branch he wanted, Leonard Funk didn't hesitate. He volunteered for the paratroopers. At the time, that choice made no sense. American airborne units barely existed. The idea of jumping out of airplanes into enemy territory sounded insane to most soldiers. No tanks, no heavy weapons, no easy way out. You dropped in surrounded and hoped your training was enough to keep you alive. Most men laughed at the idea. The ones who didn't were different. Airborne training was designed to break you. 5 weeks of pure punishment. Endless running, obstacle courses that chewed up bodies. Half the volunteers washed out before ever touching an aircraft. Then came the planes. The first time Funk stood in the door of a C-47, 1,200 feet above the ground, every instinct screamed at him to grab something and hold on. The wind ripped at his uniform. The noise swallowed thought. All that separated him from death was fabric, cord, and faith. He jumped anyway. By the time Funk earned his jump wings, he wasn't loud about it, didn't brag, didn't pose. He just folded the wings into his gear and kept moving. He was assigned to Company C, 1st Battalion, 508th Paratrooper Infantry Regiment, Camp Blanding, Florida, later England, then the 82nd Airborne Division, the All-Americans. These weren't green soldiers. They were veterans, men who had already jumped into Sicily, Italy, men who had killed and buried friends. Funk was the new guy, and at 27 he was considered old by airborne standards. Most of his squad mates were barely 20. But Funk had something they didn't: calm. When things went wrong, and they always did, he didn't panic, he didn't freeze. He thought, quietly, quickly. That kind of steadiness spreads. Men notice it. They start looking to you without even realizing why. By the time June 1944 rolled around, Funk was a squad leader. Then came Normandy. June 6, 1944, 1:30 a.m. The C-47 shook as German flak tore through the sky. Tracers sliced past the windows like angry fireflies. Funk stood in the jump line with 60 pounds of gear strapped to his body, ammunition, grenades, rations, a Thompson submachine gun hanging heavy against his chest. The aircraft was flying too low, way too low, but the pilots couldn't climb. If they did, they'd be shot out of the sky. The green jump light came on. Funk stepped into nothing. The prop blast slammed him like a truck. Then the parachute snapped open, and suddenly everything went silent. Below him was France, occupied France, enemy territory in every direction. The drop was chaos, planes scattered, paratroopers blown miles off course, men drowned in flooded fields, crushed under their own equipment. Others landed inside German camps and were killed before they could even unclip. Funk hit the ground hard. His ankle twisted violently. Pain shot up his leg like fire. Sprained, maybe broken. Every step would hurt for weeks. He didn't stop. He buried his parachute, grabbed his weapon, and started moving. Alone, in the dark, 40 miles from where he was supposed to be. By morning, he wasn't alone anymore. Lost paratroopers started drifting in. Different units, different regiments, confused, scattered, looking for someone who knew what to do. They found Leonard Funk. 18 men followed him through 10 days of enemy territory, night movement, daytime hiding, short, violent fights when there was no other option. Funk insisted on walking point despite his injured ankle, the most dangerous position, because that's where leaders belonged. When they finally reached Allied lines on June 17th, every single man was alive. No casualties. 40 miles, 10 days, behind enemy lines. That alone would have made most soldiers legends. For Leonard Funk, it was just the beginning.
Surviving Normandy should have been the end of it. For most men, 10 days behind enemy lines would have been a lifetime's worth of war. Funk could have slowed down, taken a safer role, let younger men take the risks. He didn't. After linking up with Allied forces, Funk barely had time to process what he'd done before the paperwork caught up with him. Silver Star, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. Medals pinned on a uniform while the war kept grinding forward without pause. Awards didn't mean much out there. Bullets didn't care what you'd earned yesterday. By late summer 1944, the war had shifted north. France was cracking. Paris was liberated. The Allies were pushing toward Germany fast, maybe too fast. Everyone wanted the war over by Christmas. That optimism would soon get a reality check. September 17, 1944. Holland. Operation Martin Garden kicked off with the largest airborne drop in history. More than 35,000 paratroopers poured out of the sky, spread across the Netherlands. The plan looked clean on paper. Seize bridges, hold them, let armored units race north into Germany. In real life, nothing was clean. Funk jumped with Company C into a countryside that looked calm and deceptively peaceful. Windmills, fields, narrow roads slicing through flat land. For a moment, it almost felt like training. Almost. The first hours went smooth. Drop zones secured, objectives taken. Funk moved with the confidence of someone who'd already learned how fast things could go wrong. And then he saw it. 3 German 20mm anti-aircraft guns dug into high ground near a village, well camouflaged, well protected, already firing. The guns weren't aimed at paratroopers, they were aimed at gliders. Those slow, silent wooden aircraft carried reinforcements, artillery, jeeps, ammo, medics, men who couldn't dodge, couldn't scatter, couldn't fight back until they landed. If those guns kept firing, hundreds of Allied soldiers were about to die in the air. Standard doctrine was clear. You don't assault a prepared position without numbers. You don't rush interlocking fields of fire. You don't attack uphill with a handful of men. Funk counted his people. 3 soldiers. That was it. Against roughly 20 Germans with heavy weapons. The math said wait. The manuals said don't. The clock said now. Funk didn't argue with the clock. He moved first. No speeches, no dramatic build-up, just motion. They approached low and fast, using terrain and timing. Funk took point again, injured ankle or not. The first shots were close, brutal, fast. The German security detail went down before they fully understood what was happening. Then Funk and his men hit the gun pits. The fighting was violent and personal. Close enough to smell cordite and sweat, close enough that hesitation meant death. Within minutes, all 3 guns were silent, crews dead or fleeing, the position destroyed. The sky changed. Gliders kept coming, and they landed. Men poured out alive instead of dying in flames. For that action, Funk received the Distinguished Service Cross, the 2nd highest award for valor in the U.S. Army. 1 step below the Medal of Honor. 2 rare decorations before the war was even close to over. Still, Funk didn't slow down. War doesn't give you time to reflect. It just hands you the next problem. December 1944. The Germans launched one last gamble, everything they had left. Tanks, infantry, artillery, a desperate punch through the Ardennes forest, aimed at Antwerp. The Battle of the Bulge. Snow buried the landscape. Temperatures dropped below zero. Men froze in foxholes. Weapons jammed. Vehicles refused to start. Entire American units collapsed under the weight of the assault. The lines bent, then broke. In the chaos, rumors spread fast. Retreats, surrenders, units wiped out. Then came Malmedy. An SS battle group captured over 100 American soldiers, artillery observers, radio men, rear echelon troops. They surrendered, disarmed, expecting prisoner of war treatment. They were lined up in a field and shot. 84 Americans murdered in cold blood, executed in the snow. The survivors crawled away after dark and brought the story back. After Malmedy, something changed. The war stopped being professional. The rules stopped existing. Trust died. When Funk heard what happened, he didn't say much. He didn't have to. Everyone felt it. A quiet, hard line forming inside. Some things couldn't be undone. Some decisions only had to be made once. By January 1945, the German offensive was broken. The Allies were pushing back hard. Funk was now acting executive officer of Company C, the man responsible when plans fell apart. And they were about to fall apart again. A small Belgian village lay ahead. Holzheim. It looked harmless. It wasn't. By January 1945, the war felt older.
Not on paper, on faces. Men looked worn down in ways cold weather couldn't explain. Eyes sunken, movements slower. The kind of exhaustion that lived inside your head, not your muscles. Company C was under strength, again. The executive officer was dead. killed weeks earlier in the Ardennes. Replacements hadn't arrived. They never arrived on time anymore. Funk stepped into the role without ceremony. There wasn't anyone else. Orders came down fast. Capture the Belgian village of Holzheim. 15 houses, narrow lanes, snow piled high against stone walls. German troops dug in across the area, using every building as a firing position. It was the kind of fight that chewed units up slowly, room by room, shot by shot. Funk studied his roster. Not enough infantry. So he did something most officers wouldn't even consider. He walked into the rear area tents. Clerks, supply men, cooks, radio techs, men whose war had been paperwork and coffee tins. Some hadn't fired a weapon in combat, some had never fired at all. Funk didn't soften it. "You're infantry now," he said. "Grab your rifles, we're moving." No speeches, no promises, just fact. 30 men formed up, a platoon built from spare parts. Snow started falling harder as they stepped off. The march to Holzheim was 15 miles through waist-deep drifts, under intermittent artillery fire, in a whiteout that erased the horizon. Some of the men wanted to quit. Funk didn't let them. He stayed at the front, setting the pace, breaking trail, showing them that if he could keep going, so could they. By the time the village came into view, they were exhausted, frozen, and running on something that felt a lot like fear. The assault was fast, house by house, doorways kicked in, grenades tossed, short bursts of gunfire echoing through narrow streets. Funk moved constantly, redirecting men, calming panicked voices, making decisions faster than doubt could catch up. It worked. 15 buildings cleared, 30 German prisoners captured by Funk's platoon, another 50 by units on the far side of the village, 80 prisoners total. Not a single American killed. It should have ended there, but war doesn't end when things go right. Funk looked at his men, shaking, spent, empty. There was still resistance deeper in the village. He couldn't afford to pull everyone back. He made a choice. 4 guards for the prisoners, all he could spare. "Keep them here," he told them. "Reinforcements are coming." They weren't. While Funk pushed forward to finish clearing Holzheim, a German patrol approached the farmhouse holding the prisoners. White camouflage capes blended perfectly into the snow. In the chaos, they looked almost American. The guards realized the mistake too late. They were rushed, disarmed, forced to their knees. The prisoners were freed. 80 armed men, plus the patrol that freed them. 90 Germans in total. They didn't panic. They organized. Machine guns repositioned, rifles handed out. A plan formed quickly. Hit Company C from the rear while they were scattered across the village. It would be a slaughter. Funk didn't know any of this. He was still fighting. When he finally circled back toward the farmhouse, it was routine. Check on the prisoners, make sure the guards were holding, see if support had arrived. He rounded the corner and walked straight into death. 4 Americans kneeling in the snow, hands behind their heads, weapons gone. German soldiers everywhere. A German officer stepped forward immediately, MP-40 raised, muzzle pressed hard into Funk's stomach. He barked an order in German. Funk didn't understand it. The officer screamed again, louder, angrier. Funk looked around. 90 enemies, 1 Thompson, no backup. Every lesson, every manual, every survival instinct said the same thing. This was over. Funk thought about Malmedy, about men who surrendered and were murdered anyway, about what would happen if these Germans got loose behind his company. He made the decision he'd already made weeks ago. He would never surrender. And, instead of reaching for his hands, Leonard Funk started laughing. The German officer shoved the MP-40 harder into Funk's gut. "Hand to Hoke. Hands up." Funk didn't move. Snow fell quietly around them, like the world had stepped away to watch what came next. The kneeling Americans stared at him with wide, helpless eyes. They knew what the order meant. They also knew Funk had a choice. He smiled. Then he exploded into motion.
Funk ripped the Thompson up from his hip and fired point blank into the officer's chest. The burst was violent, deafening. The man dropped instantly, blood soaking the snow before his body even hit the ground. For half a second, the Germans froze. That half second was everything. Funk spun left, hammering the trigger. The Thompson bucked hard, spraying .45 rounds through a cluster of soldiers scrambling for cover. 2 fell. A third screamed and collapsed, clutching his leg. Machine gun fire tore into the wall behind him. Snow and stone shattered. Funk didn't slow down. He moved straight into them, running toward 90 armed enemies with no plan except violence and speed. He fired until the magazine ran dry, then slammed a fresh one home without looking. His hands moved on instinct. Training took over where fear couldn't survive. German soldiers shouted orders. Someone yelled his rank. Another voice screamed panic. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. One American officer charging directly at them. Funk vaulted a low stone wall, firing mid-air. A German with a rifle raised it too late. Funk's rounds caught him in the chest, flipping him backward like a rag doll. A machine gun opened up from the right. Funk turned and ran straight at it. Bullets snapped past his head. Snow kicked up around his boots. He emptied another burst into the gun crew, cutting them down before they could adjust their aim. The Germans started breaking. Not retreating, breaking. This wasn't how fights were supposed to go. Numbers mattered. Position mattered. None of it mattered now. Funk had turned the battlefield into chaos. He shouted, not orders, pure rage. The sound cut through the noise and did something strange. It woke Company C. American soldiers who had been clearing houses heard the gunfire behind them. They heard the Thompson ripping non-stop. They heard shouting in German. They turned and they ran back. By the time the first Americans arrived, the scene was unreal. German bodies scattered across the snow, weapons abandoned, prisoners fleeing in every direction. Funk still moving, still firing, still pushing forward like he hadn't noticed he was alone. The Germans didn't regroup, they ran. Some disappeared into the woods, others dropped their weapons and vanished into the storm. A few tried to surrender again, hands raised, voices shaking. Funk let him go. He didn't stop until there was no one left to shoot. Silence fell slowly. Funk stood there, chest heaving, uniform torn, face blackened with powder and snow. His Thompson hung heavy in his hands. He looked down. A bullet had torn through his coat. Another had grazed his arm. He hadn't felt either. Around him, American soldiers stared like they were looking at something unreal. One of them finally spoke. "Sir, are you hit?" Funk shook his head. "Round up whoever's left," he said calmly. "We're not done." 90 Germans. Gone. 4 Americans alive. Company C still standing. Word spread fast. Too fast. By nightfall, officers from other units were walking through Holtzheim, pointing at the blood-stained snow, trying to piece together what had happened. Some didn't believe it. Some laughed. Some just went quiet. Because everyone understood one thing. What Leonard Funk had done wasn't brave. It was insane. And it worked. By the time night fully swallowed Holtzheim, the story had already escaped the village. It moved the way war stories always do. Fast, messy, unbelievable. An entire German force wiped out. 4 prisoners freed. 1 officer charging 90 men and winning. At first, command didn't buy it. They never do. Reports came in from Company C, then from Company A, then from medics who'd seen the bodies. Different voices, same details, same name. Lieutenant Leonard Funk. A battalion intelligence officer stood over a map, rubbing his temples. 90? He asked. Yes, sir. And Funk was alone? Yes, sir. The room went quiet. They'd seen bravery before. They'd seen stupidity, too. This didn't fit either box. This was something else. A moment where a man decided reality would bend, and somehow it did. An officer finally muttered, "That's not doctrine." Another answered, "Neither is surviving that." Funk was called in the next morning. He walked into headquarters like nothing had happened. Same calm posture, same steady eyes, uniform patched up, boots still muddy with frozen Belgian snow.
No swagger, no hero act, just tired. A colonel stared at him for a long moment. "Lieutenant, do you understand what you did yesterday?" Funk shrugged. "They were about to kill my men." That was it. No speech, no explanation, no talk of courage or sacrifice, just a simple fact. The colonel leaned back. "You realize you disobeyed standing orders?" "Yes, sir." "You understand you could have been killed?" "Yes, sir." "And you still did it?" "Yes, sir." Silence again. The colonel exhaled slowly. "You saved 4 American lives. You broke an enemy unit, and you probably saved this entire flank." He paused. "I don't recommend officers act like this regularly." A few men chuckled. "But," the colonel continued, "when history looks back, this is the kind of moment they don't forget." The paperwork started immediately. Witness statements, after-action reports, maps marked with positions Funk shouldn't have survived crossing, numbers that still didn't make sense on paper. One clerk wrote in the margin, "Appears exaggerated." Another crossed it out. Medics examined Funk later that day. 2 bullet grazes, 1 coat torn clean through, no serious wounds. "Lucky," one said. Funk shook his head. "No." He didn't explain further. Word spread through the ranks. Men started asking for Funk's company, not because they wanted to fight, but because they believed if things went bad, that man wouldn't freeze. Soldiers told the story at night, by candlelight and cigarettes. Some added details, some toned it down. None of it mattered. The core stayed the same. One man refused to surrender his momentum. High Command sent the recommendation up the chain. Medal of Honor. The highest recognition, rare, heavy, usually given posthumously. This time, the man was still alive. But Funk didn't celebrate. He went back to work, because the war wasn't done, and somewhere ahead, the Germans were regrouping, learning, adjusting. Holzheim was just one moment. The real test wasn't whether Funk could explode into chaos. It was whether he could survive the silence that came after. Before Holzheim, before the Thompson, before 90 rifles pointed his way, Leonard Funk was just another officer trying to survive the war. He wasn't loud, he wasn't famous, he wasn't chasing glory. He grew up in the American Midwest, flatland, hard winters, quiet mornings, the kind of place where men learn early that panic doesn't fix anything, where you finish the job even when your hands hurt. Funk wasn't the strongest guy in the room. He wasn't the best shot either, but there was something different about him. He didn't freeze. During training, instructors noticed it. Live fire drills, night exercises, chaos simulations. When others rushed or hesitated, Funk slowed down. His world narrowed. Decisions became simple. Move, act, finish. In combat before Belgium, he'd already proven it. Small patrols under fire, ambushes gone wrong, men pinned down with nowhere to go. Every time Funk stepped forward when no one else did, not because he wanted to be a hero, but because someone had to. One sergeant once said, "Sir, you act like you don't feel fear." Funk answered, "I feel it, I just don't let it vote." That line stuck. By the time winter hit Europe, Funk had learned a brutal truth. Hesitation killed faster than bullets. Once your mind accepted that death was possible, even likely, fear lost its grip. Holzheim wasn't luck, it was pattern. The Germans had trained him without knowing it. Every close call, every near miss,
every time he'd walked away when he shouldn't have. On that snowy morning, when the MP-40 hit his stomach, Funk didn't see 90 men. He saw a moment, a split second where the enemy believed he was already beaten, and Funk understood something instinctively. The first man to act would own the outcome. That's why he laughed. Laughter wasn't madness, it was dominance. It broke the script in the German officer's head. It bought him half a second. Half a second was enough. After Holzheim, some soldiers said Funk was reckless, others said he was blessed, a few said he was cursed. Funk didn't argue. He knew the truth was simpler. He'd made a decision once, long before Belgium, that if he was going to die, it wouldn't be on his knees. That decision followed him into every fight, and it wasn't done yet. Because war doesn't reward bravery. It tests it again and again, until it finally breaks. The ceremony didn't happen in Belgium. Wars don't pause for applause.
Months later, far from the frozen fields of Holzheim, Leonard Funk stood in formation, clean uniform, polished boots. The same man, but older somehow. The citation was read aloud, words like conspicuous gallantry, intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty, single-handedly routed superior enemy forces. Each sentence felt heavier than the last. Funk listened quietly. He remembered the snow, the shouting, the officer's face inches from his own. None of that fit neatly into official language. When the Medal of Honor was placed around his neck, cameras flashed, officers nodded, men whispered. This was history now. But Funk felt strange, because medals don't carry the noise. They don't carry the smell of gunpowder or the weight of bodies in the snow. They don't carry the moment where everything could have ended. Afterwards, someone congratulated him. "Hell of a thing you did." Funk answered softly, "Hell of a thing that worked." That was the difference. Others saw victory. Funk saw probability. He knew how close it had been, how easily the story could have ended with a shallow grave and a footnote. The medal followed him everywhere after that. Men treated him differently. Younger soldiers watched him closely. Officers asked for his opinion in briefings. He didn't like it, because the medal suggested certainty, that bravery guaranteed survival. Funk knew better. He'd stared straight into the moment where courage and death touched. There was no promise there, just choice. The war moved on, so did Funk. He finished his service, he went home. He lived a life quieter than anyone expected. No speeches, no books, no obsession with the past. When asked about Holzheim years later, he kept it short. "I did what needed doing. Nothing more." The world would remember the numbers, 90 Germans, 1 man. But Funk remembered something else. 4 Americans kneeling in the snow, alive. And that was enough. The ceremony didn't happen in Belgium. Wars don't pause for applause. Months later, far from the frozen fields of Holzheim, Leonard Funk stood in formation, clean uniform, polished boots. The same man, but older somehow. The citation was read aloud, words like conspicuous gallantry, intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty, single-handedly routed superior enemy forces. Each sentence felt heavier than the last. Funk listened quietly. He remembered the snow, the shouting, the officer's face inches from his own. None of that fit neatly into official language. When the Medal of Honor was placed around his neck, cameras flashed, officers nodded, men whispered. This was history now. But Funk felt strange, because medals don't carry the noise. They don't carry the smell of gunpowder or the weight of bodies in the snow. They don't carry the moment where everything could have ended. Afterwards, someone congratulated him. "Hell of a thing you did." Funk answered softly, "Hell of a thing that worked." That was the difference. Others saw victory. Funk saw probability. He knew how close it had been, how easily the story could have ended with a shallow grave and a footnote.
The medal followed him everywhere after that. Men treated him differently. Younger soldiers watched him closely. Officers asked for his opinion in briefings. He didn't like it, because the medal suggested certainty, that bravery guaranteed survival. Funk knew better. He'd stared straight into the moment where courage and death touched. There was no promise there, just choice. The war moved on, so did Funk. He finished his service. He went home. He lived a life quieter than anyone expected. No speeches, no books, no obsession with the past. When asked about Holtzheim years later, he kept it short. I did what needed doing. Nothing more. The world would remember the numbers, 90 Germans, 1 man. But Funk remembered something else. 4 Americans kneeling in the snow, alive. And that was enough. Leonard Funk walked out of the war alive, decorated, but unbroken by ego. He didn't chase fame. He didn't trade his story for glory. He went home to Pennsylvania, back to the ordinary life of paperwork, bureaucracy, and helping fellow veterans navigate their own battles. The medals hung in a case at his house, reminders of the chaos, courage, and absurdity he had survived. People asked about them, about Holtzheim, about the 90 Germans. He'd shrug. I did what needed doing, nothing more. The people living knew his name. He was man in the snow forever. The story lingered. Soldiers whispered about it for decades. Paratroopers learned it. Young men in training heard the tale of the man who laughed at death and stared it down with nothing but courage, calm, and sharp instincts. Funk's life showed a deeper lesson. Courage isn't about size, strength, or brute force. It's about thinking when others freeze, acting when others hesitate, and doing what's right even when the world seems against you. At Holtzheim, a snow-covered Belgian village, 90 armed enemies faced 1 man, and through focus, instinct, and sheer guts, Leonard Funk lived. He passed away quietly in 1992. The world remembered his awards. Few knew his name, but the essence of his heroism lived on. Not in headlines, not in books, but in the decisions we make when the odds are impossible. Leonard Funk reminds us, legends aren't always loud. Sometimes they're quiet man in snow, laughing in the face of impossible odds, and surviving because they refuse to surrender, not just to enemies, but to fear itself. The snow melted, the war ended, but Funk's courage echoes forever.